Alright, so I don't usually post on here, but I feel like this story might actually help someone out there. Maybe even you if you're reading this at the right moment. It's about how one insane week turned my life upside down and, somehow, gave me the biggest push I've ever had to change everything. A little background. I was stuck. Not just at work, but in life. I was clocking in and out at this dead-end job, barely speaking to my coworkers, eating junk food for dinner, scrolling on my phone until 2 a.m., then waking up feeling like garbage. Every day looked the same. And the worst part? I thought I was managing. Then one morning, it was a random Tuesday. I remember because I spilled coffee on my shirt right before heading out. I saw something that rattled me. I was on my way to the bus stop when this guy about my age, maybe a little younger, jogged past me. He had that confident, effortless energy I hadn't felt in years. But what got me wasn't the jogging. It was that he stopped right in front of me, leaned down, and picked up a wallet someone had dropped. And instead of pocketing it, which, let's be honest, 90% of people would have done without blinking, he literally turned around, found the woman who dropped it, and handed it back with the biggest grin. She hugged him like he'd just saved her life. And I just stood there, late for work, watching. It was such a small thing, but it hit me like a truck. Why? Because at that exact moment, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I did something good for someone without expecting something back. I couldn't even remember the last time I felt proud of myself for anything. I wish I could say I immediately decided to change, but honestly, my first reaction was anger. Not at him, at myself. Anger that I'd let myself get so numb, that I was living on autopilot while other people, right in front of me, were actually living. That's the moment the week started. And trust me, it only got crazier from there. So, I dragged myself to work that same day, still replaying what I'd seen, the jogger, the wallet, the hug. I'm half ashamed, half inspired, and definitely in my own head. Then, like the universe had been waiting for me to finally wake up, it threw me a curveball. I get to the office, and right away my manager pulls me aside. My gut dropped because he never talks to me unless I've screwed something up. He closes the door to his office, sits down, and with this fake corporate smile says, "We're restructuring. That's code for you're screwed." Sure enough, I was being let go. Effective immediately. No warning, no severance beyond 2 weeks' pay. Just a polite little speech about how they valued my time here. I'd given them 5 years of my life, working weekends, skipping family stuff, bending over backward when they needed me, and they cut me loose like I was nothing. I walked out of that office in a haze. My coworkers looked at me, some with pity, some with relief that it wasn't them. I couldn't even make eye contact. I grabbed the sad little plant from my desk, shoved it into a box with my coffee mug, and left. And here's the wild part. The second I stepped outside, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel freedom. I felt betrayal. Betrayal that I'd given my loyalty, my time, my energy, and in return, I was disposable. Just another name on a spreadsheet. I remember sitting at the bus stop with that box in my lap, heart pounding. For the first time in years, I had no idea what came next. And here's the kicker, the jogger from the morning? Yeah, he passed by again. No joke. Same energy, same easy stride, like he belonged in the world in a way I didn't. I wanted to hate him, but instead I just sat there wondering, what the hell have I been doing with my life? That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a mess. Rage at my boss, shame at myself, and this gnawing panic about bills. I kept thinking, what now? I didn't have savings, didn't have a backup plan. Just a resume that felt like a bad joke. The next morning, instead of moping at home, I forced myself out for a walk. Honestly, I just didn't want to sit in my apartment staring at the walls. And guess who I ran into again? Yeah, the jogger. But this time, something unexpected happened. He stopped, right in front of me. I must have looked like hell because he tilted his head and said, "Rough day?" I almost laughed. Rough life. But I just nodded. He introduced himself, Evan. Turns out he jogged that same route every morning on his way to a local cafe. He asked if I wanted to join him for coffee. Now, normally I'd have said no. I don't do strangers. But something in me just gave in. I followed him. At the cafe, he ordered for both of us like he'd known me forever. And then, out of nowhere, he said, You look like a guy who's carrying a heavy load. What's holding you back? That question punched me in the gut. I spilled everything. The layoff, the betrayal, the way I'd been drifting for years. I expected him to nod politely, maybe give some cheesy motivational quote. Instead, he leaned back, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Good. You're free now. Most people never get forced to change. You just did." It hit me so hard I couldn't even reply. And then, here's the crazy twist. He offered me something. Not money, not a pep talk. He told me he was starting a small project, something he believed could change lives. He didn't give details right away, but he asked if I'd be willing to help out. Me, the guy who just got thrown away like trash at his old job. I didn't know whether to laugh in his face or say yes. But my gut whispered, this is one of those crossroads moments. So there I was, sitting in that little cafe with a half-finished coffee, staring at this guy who, for some reason, saw something in me I couldn't even see in myself. He leaned in, lowered his voice, and finally explained his project. Evan told me he was working with a small group of people to build a nonprofit that helped young adults who'd hit rock bottom, addiction, unemployment, you name it. They gave them a space, mentorship, and actual practical steps to rebuild their lives. I laughed at first. Man, I can't even fix my own life. How the hell am I supposed to help anyone else? But he shook his head. Exactly. That's why you can. You know what it feels like to fall. People trust people who've been through it. And then he dropped the kicker. One of their volunteers had just quit, and they needed someone who could organize events, handle logistics, and be around to talk with people. You'd be perfect, he said. Now, my instinct screamed no way. I'd just been burned by a job. I didn't want to risk feeling used again. But at the same time, something inside me was buzzing. Like a door I didn't even know existed had cracked open. That night, I paced my apartment for hours. My brain kept listing reasons to say no: money, stability, the fear of failing again. But my gut kept dragging me back to the image of me at that bus stop, clutching a box of my worthless office junk, while Evan ran past me looking alive. I was torn between two voices, one saying, play it safe. Find another soul-crushing office job. The other whispering, take the damn leap. At 2 a.m., I sent Evan a text. I'll do it. I didn't know it then, but that single decision would take me into situations I never could have predicted, some inspiring, some heartbreaking, and one that nearly broke me completely. When I showed up at the nonprofit for the first time, I expected something small, maybe a rented office with some folding chairs and a coffee pot. Instead, I walked into organized chaos. The place was buzzing with people. Some looked like they hadn't slept in days, some were in recovery, some were fresh out of jail, and others were just regular folks volunteering. Evan greeted me like we'd been friends forever. He handed me a clipboard and said, "You're running orientation today." I froze. Orientation? I thought I was going to be shadowing someone, maybe taking notes. But nope. He shoved me straight into the fire. So there I was, standing in front of 12 people, trying to explain a program I barely understood myself. My voice cracked. My hands shook. A couple of the guys in the back snickered. I wanted to run out the door. But then, something unexpected happened. A girl, maybe 20 years old, with tattoos on her arms and a haunted look in her eyes, raised her hand. She said, "So, do you really believe this program works? Or is this just another scam?" That question hit me harder than I thought. Because honestly, I didn't know if it worked. I didn't even know if I worked. But for some reason, instead of panicking, I answered with the only truth I had. I don't know yet. But I do know this. I was stuck, and I'm here because I want to believe change is possible. So maybe we figure it out together. The room went quiet. And then, slowly, she nodded. That tiny moment changed everything. For the first time in years, I felt useful. Like my screw-ups, my lost years, weren't just wasted time. They were fuel for something real. But before I could even catch my breath, another twist hit me. After the session, Evan pulled me aside and said, "You did good. But there's something you need to know about this place. Not everyone here is what they seem." I thought he meant the volunteers. Turns out, he was warning me about something much darker. Evan's words stuck in my head the whole night. Not everyone here is what they seem. I didn't know what to make of it. Was he talking about the people in recovery? The volunteers? Him? I just started, and already there was this shadow hanging over the whole thing. Over the next couple of weeks, I tried to ignore it and just focus on the work. And honestly, I was surprised by how much I started to enjoy it. I was helping organize events, sitting in on group talks, and even just listening when people needed to vent. For the first time in forever, I wasn't invisible. But the cracks started showing fast. First, I noticed money was always tight. Evan kept saying donations would come through, but I saw receipts that didn't add up. Like thousands spent on supplies that never showed up. Then there was Mark, one of the senior volunteers. He had this fake smile plastered on his face whenever Evan was around, but the second Evan left, he turned cold. Bossy, dismissive, almost territorial, like he wanted to remind everyone he was the one really in charge. The weirdest part? The same girl who'd asked me if the program was a scam, her name was Lila, pulled me aside one afternoon and whispered, "Don't trust everyone here. Some people are only here for themselves." That sent a chill down my spine, because it confirmed what Evan had said on day one. I wanted to believe this place was pure, a chance to build something good. But now my gut was screaming that something was off. And then, one night, I stayed late to finish some paperwork. That's when I saw Mark slipping out the back door with a duffel bag. Heavy, suspicious. He didn't notice me, but I noticed him. The nonprofit wasn't just about second chances. Something shady was happening under the surface, and I was right in the middle of it. I couldn't get the image of Mark and that duffel bag out of my head. It ate at me for days. Part of me wanted to brush it off. Maybe it was just gym clothes, right? But deep down, I knew better. His whole vibe had snake written all over it. So, one evening after everyone cleared out, I stayed behind again. I waited. And sure enough, Mark showed up, same back door, same bag. Only this time, I followed. I kept my distance as he walked 2 blocks down to a sketchy-looking bar. He went inside, came out 10 minutes later, without the bag. The next morning, I tried to play it cool, but when I brought it up casually, "Hey, what were you doing last night?" He gave me this tight smile and said, "Just running errands." "Why? You keeping tabs on me now?" The way he said it sent a jolt of ice down my spine. He knew I'd seen something. Later that day, I decided to check the storage room. And what do you know? Half the donated supplies, canned food, toiletries, even some electronics people had given, were gone. Just vanished. That's when it hit me. Mark wasn't just sketchy. He was stealing from the very people this nonprofit was supposed to help. I was furious. Furious at him. Furious at myself for not saying anything sooner. And even furious at Evan. Because how the hell could he not notice? But here's where it cut deeper. When I finally worked up the courage to tell Evan, I expected him to thank me, to take action. Instead, his face tightened. He sighed and said, "I know." I just stared at him. "What do you mean, you know?" And that's when the second betrayal landed. Evan admitted he'd been letting Mark handle things because Mark had connections, donors, and influence. If we cut him loose, he said, this whole place could collapse. So, basically, Evan knew supplies were being siphoned off and was letting it slide. The guy I'd trusted to help me rebuild my life was turning a blind eye to theft at the expense of people who had nothing. I walked home that night shaking with anger. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. I'd finally found purpose, only to realize I was standing on quicksand. The worst part? I didn't know whether to walk away or blow it all up. I didn't sleep that night. My head was a storm. On one side, my anger kept saying, expose Mark. Burn him. Save the program. On the other side, this sick little voice whispered, don't get involved. It's not your fight. Walk away before you get crushed. I thought about Lila, the girl who'd asked me if this was a scam. What would I tell her now? That she was right? That the whole thing was a front for someone else's greed? By morning, I was running on fumes, pacing around my apartment. Every option felt like betrayal. If I stayed silent, I'd be betraying the people who trusted us. If I spoke up, I'd be betraying Evan, the guy who gave me my shot at starting over. Finally, I decided to do something in between. I started keeping notes. Every sketchy receipt, every time Mark left early, every missing box of supplies, I wrote it down. Part of me thought I was crazy, but another part of me felt alive again. like I was finally standing up for something that mattered. A week later, I got my first real confirmation. I was organizing donations when I overheard Mark in the back, whispering on the phone. "Yeah, I've got another batch for you tonight. Don't worry, nobody here's gonna notice." My blood went cold. He wasn't just stealing, he was selling the donations. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I wasn't going to let the whole place rot just because Evan was too afraid to lose a donor. But here's where things took a turn I never saw coming. That evening, when I was heading out, I found a folded piece of paper shoved into the strap of my backpack. No name, just one line written in shaky handwriting. "Be careful who you trust." My stomach dropped. Someone else knew, and someone was watching me. I carried that note home like it was a live grenade. Be careful who you trust. My first thought was Lila. She was sharp, and she already seemed suspicious of the whole setup. But the handwriting didn't look like hers. It was shaky, almost trembling, like someone had written it in a rush or with fear. For the next few days, I kept my head down, pretending nothing was wrong. But every time I saw Mark, my stomach knotted. And every time I saw Evan, I felt this heavy disappointment, like the guy I thought was my lifeline was just another coward. Then it happened. I was locking up after a late meeting when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, ready for Mark, but it wasn't him. It was an older man I'd seen hanging around the edges of the program, quiet, reserved, always sitting in the back during group talks. His name was Harold. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder, and then he muttered, "I wrote the note." I just froze. Harold went on to explain that he'd been watching Mark for months. He knew about the missing supplies, the shady phone calls, everything. But he didn't have the guts to say anything. He was on probation himself and terrified that if he made waves, he'd get kicked out of the program. What shook me most was when he said, "You're new. People actually listen to you. If anyone can stop him, it's you." I wanted to laugh in his face. Me? The guy who'd just been tossed aside by a corporate job like trash? The guy who was barely holding himself together? But I could see in Harold's eyes, he wasn't flattering me. He was desperate. And that desperation lit something in me. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I wasn't just drifting. Maybe this was my fight. I told Harold, "Okay, we're going to deal with this. But we do it carefully." What I didn't realize then was that carefully was a fantasy. Because once I started pushing back, things spun completely out of control. Harold and I started meeting in secret. Late evenings after everyone left, sometimes in the dingy storage room, sometimes at a diner across the street where the coffee tasted like burnt rubber. We weren't friends, exactly, but we shared the same urgency, the same knot of anger in our guts. We began collecting proof. Harold showed me where he'd seen boxes disappear. I kept copies of receipts that didn't add up. We even snapped a few photos when Mark wasn't looking. Every piece felt like another stone in a wall we were building against him. But here's the thing, living double lives eats at you. By day, I had to smile, shake hands, pretend everything was fine. By night, I was practically shaking, waiting for Mark to slip up big enough to nail him. The breaking point came one Thursday. We were unloading a shipment of donated laptops, 10 of them, brand new, still sealed in boxes. I remember thinking, if these disappear, that's it. We've got him. Sure enough, 2 days later, 3 were gone. No record, no explanation. That's when I made my move. Instead of going to Evan, who I no longer trusted, I went straight to one of the donors. A local business guy who'd written a fat check for those laptops. I told him, carefully, that some donations weren't reaching the people they were meant for. I didn't give every detail, but I gave enough. His face went red. He thanked me, tight-lipped, and said he'd look into it. I walked out of his office shaking, half exhilarated, half terrified. I'd finally done something. I'd set the fuse. But that night, when I got home, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "You shouldn't have done that." That text hit me like a punch to the gut. You shouldn't have done that. My first thought was Mark, of course, but the handwriting? Digital, cold, impersonal, and that made it worse. For the next few days, every noise, every knock at the door, every shadow in the office made my heart race. I started double-checking locks, leaving lights on, even walking a little faster when heading home. My life felt invaded. At the same time, the donor had followed through. A few days later, Evan called an emergency meeting. He didn't look angry at me, at least not directly, but the tension in the room could have snapped steel. He started pacing and said, "Someone's questioning our operations. Donations. Mismanagement. I don't know who it is, but if this leaks," he let the sentence hang. I could see Mark shifting uncomfortably, his fake smile gone. Evan glanced at me for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. He knew I was involved, and that's when it really sank in. I had made waves, and now I was in the crosshairs. Not just of Mark, not just of the nonprofit, but of the fear and betrayal that had been simmering since day one. I left that meeting, heart pounding, and walked past Lila on my way out. She gave me a small, knowing nod. No words, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't alone. That night, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about how I got here. A dead-end job, a chance encounter with a jogger, and now this. My life had turned into something I didn't recognize, but part of me was alive in a way it hadn't been in years. I just didn't know if alive meant winning or getting burned. It didn't take long. A week later, Mark decided to make his move. I was in the office late, going over some documents with Harold, when the door slammed open. Mark stood there, face red, fists clenched. "I know what you've been doing," he hissed. "If you think you can ruin me, think again. You're done here." I froze for a moment, heart hammering. This was it. The moment I'd feared and anticipated. But something in me snapped. Years of being pushed around, of feeling invisible, of watching life pass me by. I wasn't about to back down now. I stood up, keeping my voice steady. "I'm not here to ruin anyone. I'm here to make sure people who need this program actually get help. If you can't do that, then maybe you shouldn't be here." Mark laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're just a kid. You think you can take me down?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out the folder we'd been compiling, receipts, photos, notes, everything. I laid it on the table. Harold nodded behind me. Mark's face went pale. He glanced at Evan, who had been called into the office when the yelling started. And that's when I realized something even more shocking. Evan didn't defend him. He didn't yell. He just looked at the evidence, and then back at me. "All right," Evan said quietly. "We'll handle this." Mark stormed out, muttering threats. I could hear him slamming the back door. And for the first time, I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. I'd stood up, risked everything, and survived. But the adrenaline faded, leaving me drained. I realized the fight wasn't over. Not for the nonprofit, not for me, but at least I'd drawn a line. After Mark was removed, things slowly began to settle. Donations that had been missing started reaching the people who actually needed them. Lila smiled more often, Harold breathed a little easier, and even Evan seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted. But for me, it wasn't instant relief. I felt drained, raw, like I'd just survived a storm. The betrayal, the threats, the fear, it left scars. I had to remind myself that stepping up and doing the right thing didn't come without a cost. At the same time, something strange happened. I realized I actually liked the work. Not just because it felt meaningful, but because it made me feel alive. For the first time in years, I had a purpose bigger than paying bills or avoiding mistakes. I had people relying on me, and I wasn't letting them down. I started thinking differently about life, about the way I had been drifting, about the way I'd let fear and comfort dictate my choices. That week, the layoff, Evan, Mark, the threats, it was all like a brutal boot camp for my soul. And maybe, I realized, that's what I needed. I began journaling again, sketching out ideas for events, programs, ways to reach more people. Slowly, I felt myself rebuilding, not just the nonprofit, but me. And the funny thing? That jogger from the beginning, Evan, the people I thought were betraying me, they all played a role. Without them, I wouldn't have pushed myself to grow, to fight, to change. A few months later, I walked into the community hall for one of our big events. Kids laughing, young adults sharing stories, volunteers hustling behind the scenes. I spotted Lila helping a younger teen with homework, Harold organizing donated supplies, and Evan chatting with donors, smiling genuinely. I stopped for a moment and just watched. And then it hit me. This was real. Not just the program, but the difference we were making. I saw people getting second chances, people believing in themselves again. People who, like me, had been stuck, lost, or betrayed by the world. It made all the fear, the anger, and the sleepless nights worth it. Every betrayal I'd endured, every threat I'd faced, had forced me to confront myself, to take a stand, to choose to act even when the outcome was uncertain. For the first time, I understood something I'd never grasped before. Change isn't given to you. You have to take it. You have to fight for it. And sometimes, it comes disguised as betrayal, loss, or fear. But if you lean into it, it can become your turning point. That day, I didn't just feel alive. I felt unstoppable. Looking back, it's wild how one random Tuesday, spilling coffee, watching a stranger return a wallet, set off a chain of events that completely changed my life. I went from a dead-end job, feeling invisible and powerless, to standing up against betrayal, navigating fear, and finding a purpose I never imagined. Here's what I learned. Life pushes you in unexpected ways. Sometimes the wake-up call comes wrapped in small, seemingly insignificant moments. Pay attention. Betrayal and fear are teachers. The sting of being used, or watching others exploit trust, can either paralyze you or push you to grow. It's your choice which path to take. Take the leap. I said yes to Evan's project without knowing the outcome. That yes changed everything. Risk can be terrifying, but it's also the gateway to transformation. Trust wisely, but act bravely. You'll encounter people who disappoint you, or even hurt you, but that doesn't mean you stop trying. You just learn to protect yourself while pursuing what matters. Change is possible, not just for you, but for the people you touch along the way. Even small actions, showing up, speaking up, standing firm, can ripple outward in ways you can't imagine. I'm not the same person I was before that week. I've learned to embrace uncertainty, to see opportunities in chaos, and to never underestimate the power of standing up for what's right. So, if you're stuck, afraid, or betrayed, remember this. Your worst moments can become the turning point of your life. You just have to be willing to step into the fire. Collision.